This will be part 4 of my Outlander Blood of My Blood Season 1 Episode 1 review. If you are looking to avoid spoilers for the books or the TV show, please do keep on scrolling. So while I'm already running on a high of watching these two meet for the first time, imagine my surprise when the scene transitions away from these two and into the frame, hot to trot, is Henry Beecham. I also loved how this shot was almost like a blink and you'll miss it scene of his back, and I clocked him immediately and was wondering when we were going to get eyes on him again, because I was already shocked that Julia was with Simon Fraser. Now he's showing up at Castle Leoch. I was wondering who the heck he was with because he is arriving just now. There were so many questions flying through my head, and we quickly find out that he is with Clan Grant. Now these people are very important both in this show and in the book series, and there's a few layers to this as they sort of lay out actually in this episode, especially since we already know from the commentary that Dougal and Colum have had earlier in the episode that they do not like the Grants. So Henry being on the side of the Grants instantly made me worried. Now, one of the key ties to the main series that I think might be overlooked is how important the Grant family actually is, particularly Malcolm Grant, and that's in two distinct ways. At this point in the storyline, Malcolm Grant is important because he is the man that Ellen Mackenzie tells off at the gathering and leaves in the night with Brian Fraser to go and elope with him. And nobody knows what Ellen said to Malcolm Grant to piss him off so much that he left without a word. So he's very much tied up in the entire elopement of Brian and Ellen and the drama surrounding it. So as we saw in this episode, he will become very important later on. But in the Outlander main series, him and Archbug, both of whom are introduced in this episode, are very important there as well. In season 4 of Outlander, we learn that Malcolm Grant was the one that sent Archbug to steal Jocasta Cameron's gold, the French gold that was used to fund Charles Stuart's rebellion. So we are seeing a young Malcolm Grant, a young Jocasta Cameron, and a young Archbug, all of whom get wrapped up in the French gold storyline from Outlander's main series. And in the books, Arch reveals that it's Malcolm Grant who sent him as one of his masked men to go steal from Jocasta Cameron. So all those years later, he is holding a grudge against a Mackenzie. We also know that Archbug in his old age was an employee of the Frasers at some point, and so he was very close with Claire. And if we follow the book canon, he would have recognized the fact at this point that Henry Beecham and Claire Beecham suspiciously might be related. Henry is introduced as the spokesperson and bladier of Clan Grant in this scene here. A bladier is someone who would inform or advise a leader of some sort in regards to legal or financial matters, and is sort of a go-between for the laird. So we can see how Henry being in that position and Ned Gowan being in his, they would be the one that would be talking with each other all the time, which makes sense. I really wasn't sure how Henry was going to be having all of these conversations with Ned. My first assumption was that he ended up at Castle Leoch somehow and met Ned there, but this makes a lot more sense that the two of them would be having more private conversations on behalf of both clans. Once everyone gets into the castle, we can see clearly here that Malcolm Grant has a crush on Ellen, just like everybody else, and she really doesn't give him the time of day. And Dougal has his eyes on Malcolm as he's conversing with Ellen, which is again foreshadowing for events later on in the episode that Dougal gets a little heavy-handed with Malcolm. And we get our first conversation between Henry and Ned Gowan, who instantly approaches him. Ned is a very educated man. He went to university in Edinburgh. He is a lawyer. He is not stupid. And so when he clocks that Henry is a Sassenach, an English person, he instantly starts to try and dig out some truth in why he ended up in this position as bladier. Ned instantly suggests a bond of friendship, and Henry answers in a very interesting way here, because as someone who has been thrust through time, lost his wife, and is in the thick of Scottish Highland politics as an English person, he answers this with a very calm, cool, collected demeanor, and as someone who doesn't seem as out of his depth as you would imagine. And I've seen people comment about how he seems far too comfortable in this position, as seen here with his smirk. And I would have to agree. I feel like watching this scene, I was kind of taken aback by how seamlessly he fit into this environment. And then watching it back after seeing how he ended up into the company of the Grants, it almost makes it even more interesting, because Henry is looking for Julia. That is how he ends up in this scenario in the first place, but he is playing the game here, and he's playing it very well. He's also clearly a very smart man, and we know only that he was a lieutenant in the military. This makes me wonder what he was doing before the war and only adds to the intrigue around his character. I did a whole video specifically on Henry because I think of all of the characters, he's the one I'm most intrigued about how they're going to write him, because we know nothing about him. He's a total blank slate, and everything I've seen about him has just made me more intrigued. And throughout their whole conversation between Henry and Ned, we can see that Colum is sort of circling the room, observing them from a distance, trying to figure out what their conversation might entail. And again, that's how both him and Dougal are really trying to get a sense of what's going on here through Ned. Ned's really the one facilitating everything. Interestingly, when asked about what happens to his predecessor, Henry says that the man went to the colonies in the interest of their laird, which is clearly a cover-up, but curious to think about how he's talking about America when his daughter will ultimately end up there. Ned tells both of the men that he doesn't believe that the Grants were responsible for the raid, and they both take that information in two different directions once again, before we cut to the next day, which is the hunt. In this scene, we can see that once again, Myrta is looking out for Ellen to spot her and hoping to get a chance to talk to her. On the whole, I think he talks a big game, but we can tell that he's a little bit shy when it comes to her, which is in keeping with his older self and how he talks to Jamie about women. And while we know that Myrta is looking at Ellen, they've placed Jocasta to her left in his sightline, and this is the first time that we get to see Jocasta setting eyes on Myrta. And this is a whole new storyline that is just for the show, so they're really kind of setting up the implication of them getting together in the main series here in the prequel. Now, when the men set out on the hunt, we see Myrta leading the pack here, and that's significant because he actually ends up killing the boar during this hunt and winning, essentially, the hunt. But I loved the framing of this shot and having him be the one to step out first, followed by Dougal, who quickly takes the lead after him. And as soon as the hunt begins, Ellen tries to make her escape, but is caught by Malcolm Grant, who wishes to walk her back to the castle. And this poor guy, you can tell, just has it so bad for her, and she has no interest in him at all. We can see here that he has this little bone carving on his person, which for a second I thought it might be related to an oathing stone. I'm hoping I can find a little bit more information about this, but it looks like there's an M and an E carved into the top of it. And one of my favorite details from this scene is that when he walks away, he sort of walks away like a little boy who didn't get a piece of candy. You know, like the way his demeanor and physicality is very childish, which I think is so appropriate. Meanwhile, Ellen, the mastermind Mackenzie, is escaping through the tunnel door that we see Jamie trying to lead Claire out of at Castle Leoch later on in the first season of Outlander, which I thought was a great Easter egg here. And as she takes off through the woods, a very heartbroken Malcolm Grant spots her running away, and I think that's the first crack in the relations between the two of them. I think he thinks she hung the moon, and now he's starting to recognize that she truly wants nothing to do with him, but that she's also up to something. And that's when we get the young Archbug stepping into frame and speaking with Malcolm. And again, there's so much that you can now assume that the elder Archbug knows about Jamie's family when we see him show up in Outlander. He would have been privy to so much about his mother. He would have heard of Claire's father, Henry Beecham, at that point and recognized her last name as well. There's just so much more context that this placement of his character adds to the later seasons of Outlander, and they do a good job making him feel like a suspicious character, and so you really kind of want to get inside his brain and ask him what he's thinking about all of this. We get a beautiful shot of Ellen riding horseback towards the bridge where Brian is waiting for her, and this scene was just so beautifully shot as well. I think the location obviously is stunning, but the way that they just slowly kind of walk towards each other over the course of their conversation I thought was brilliant. And even though they used a clip from this scene as promotional material, which I did do a full breakdown of, and you can find that video on my page, there's so much more in the back half of this conversation that I think is really important, because this is the moment where the two of them really kind of decide that they're each other's person. And it is almost instantaneous. And how could you not fall in love on a bridge like this in Scotland? And even though the two of them figure out who exactly they are to one another and the Romeo and Juliet of it all, they've decided pretty much here, and Ellen's kind of the one spearheading this, that they're going to find a way to make this work. Go watch my video breaking down the first half of their conversation and come back for part 5 to watch the breakdown of the second half.